I'd like to call to order the December 10th, 2018 regularly scheduled meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission. Could we please have the roll call?
Commissioner Coronado?
Here.
Commissioner Schwartzbacher?
Here.
Chair Pro Tem Stallman?
Here.
Chair Rudnick?
Here.
Commissioner Bolt?
Here.
Commissioner Breidenbaugh?
Here.
Commissioner Miller?
Here.
Commissioner Allman? Here. And Commissioner Reynolds is absent tonight.
And he is sick, apparently. His wife has told us. Okay. We have a full meeting tonight with two general business items, a public hearing, as well as a study session afterwards in the community room. You have before you the agenda. Is there a change to the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, I've been asked to acknowledge the Boy Scouts in our audience, and you're here because merit badge or what?
General enthusiasm for municipal government.
Otherwise, well, it's either that or doing homework or something. So, and I have been asked if one of you could lead us into the Pledge of Allegiance, if you don't mind. Please do. There we go. Let's all stand up. Here we go.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. We're now up to minutes to be approved. You all saw copies of our last meeting 2 weeks ago. Any changes, corrections, deletions?
Just one.
Huh.
So on page 2, my name added a couple of extra letters. And being as I already have 12, I don't need them. It's on page 2 right at the top.
With that change, a cataclysmic change, is there any other changes, deletions, corrections? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve based on the recording secretary's certification and the change offered by Commissioner Schwartzbacher, the 26 November 2018 action minutes for the 26 November 2018 regular meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission.
I'm going to abstain. Sorry, I wasn't there last.
Okay, you'll be abstaining. Yeah. Robin gave us a second. Any discussion? Please vote.
All right, that's unanimous with Commissioner Miller abstaining.
Great. Next item is public comment. These are public comments for general business and non-agenda related items. If you're here to speak about our public hearing about Sycamore Street, we ask that you hold off until that hearing. You'll have a chance to speak then. We have a sign-up list. If you haven't signed up and you still wish to speak, we'll ask you to speak when we get finished with our list. Thank you. We have one signed up speaker, Sarah Kilner. And let me give you the ground rules here. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Please give your name, address. We expect the discourse to be civil. Thank you. When you have 30 seconds left, our recording secretary will hold up the yellow card, and the dreaded card will come up when you have red card will come up when you have no time left. Okay. So go ahead. If you could speak directly into the microphone.
Sure. Thank you.
Great.
All right. My name is Sarah Kilner, and I'm an attorney for Pure Strike, Development. They are a company that is looking to potentially purchase a parcel that's going to be the subject of the first resolution that you guys are considering tonight. It is the resolution to extend the boundary of Subdistrict 3 and the downtown Littleton design standards. Thank you for hearing my comments today. Right now, Pure Strike has opted to, and correct me if I am standing up and speaking at the wrong point.
You're speaking at the right point.
All right, thank you. So the property that's at issue here is the subject of this resolution. The resolution seeks to extend the boundary of a design standards plan that it's my understanding you all probably know much more about this than I do, but that was in the works for a long time. Design standards for downtown, for several different areas. There are several different subparts to it. And based on my understanding, that was also only approved about 4 months ago. The area that it is extending to includes only this parcel. There are a few other parcels that are owned by CDOT, but the only private parcel that is owned by a private member of the community is this parcel. And so it's, just to give you some context, Arapahoe County's property is to the south of the parcel that I'm speaking of. Regal Plastics is to the east, and the apartment complexes are to the north. So the two parcels combined, I kind of refer to it as one, but it's really two parcels that makes up about 1.65 acres. It's currently zoned B3, and it is surrounded to the south and the east by an I2 zoning district, or heavy industrial. To the north, it's a planned development residential, the apartments that I imagine you're familiar with. My client's plan is to hopefully put a hotel on that site, which is a use by right. My client initiated contact with the city over a year ago in December of 2017. And just so you're aware, my client develops these types of hotels around the state. Currently, there's one in Centennial. And it works with municipalities fairly regularly for developments like this. It submitted its formal application in August of 2018 and received comments in October from the city of this year. So it has been working diligently since October to, excuse me.
You better give us your summary.
I'll quickly hurry up. It's been working diligently with the city for quite a while on this plan, or on the city's comments, and then was very much surprised when all of a sudden the design standards that nobody had raised with them were brought up. So it feels like it's, frankly, some of the comments that it received from the city are inconsistent with the design standards that are now being proposed. And my client is concerned that it's been singled out and frankly feels a little bit like a ping pong ball going back and forth, unsure about what to do or why this is happening. Frankly, we think it's unnecessary and not consistent. Okay, that's fine. I was just going to say one last thing, that it's concerned that it's not consistent with the intentional nature of the design standards as they were implemented before, the kind of ad hoc nature that's being applied to them and not their neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the people that have signed up to speak. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Pam.
I'm Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here. I guess a couple of things, and last time I spoke about these design standards as well. I don't see the compelling reason for the city's inclusion of this property, especially because it's been spoken before in over years that Alexan should be included. That's another gateway to the city, even though it's on a different street. And why not address the whole area when you're looking at this? It does seem as a response to the applicant, and actually it may be beneficial to the city, but it kind of shows the failure of our planning process that this comes up at this point. I'm going to tell you my personal problem with this, and that is that along Prince Street there's a depression with cattails. And those cattails are a stepping stone for animals that come from the river to the cattails, then up the Slaughterhouse Gulch area into the residential area that still exists. And the city should plan for these kinds of pathways for wildlife. Otherwise, we're going to have a sterile environment. Even though we say that we're going to preserve the river and its assets, we're not going to if we don't let life have a place to spread out from the river. And so I'm going to point this out again as a, I'll say, planning opportunity to try to be positive, but we have failed to do this in the past, and there is harm occurring. Harm is occurring because of the failure of our planning process, both by staff and by you, because you bring policy to this. So please, Planning Commission, get your heads out of the application job and trying to give away stuff to applicants, and get back to planning the city. So now I want to talk about the Envision document, and it seems clear to me that there's a couple things in there that did not come from the people and are special interest oriented. And when it talks about who's going to plan the city, it says staff and informed residents or something like that. So it really needs to be a community process. That paragraph should be changed to include all of us. And that seems pretty obvious to me. Finally, what I want to say is our zoning code was a plan, and it has integrity and value, and it has been built on. We're not built out. There is something on everything, but it's not built up to what the zoning code allows. So to keep giving exceptions to this doesn't even allow our plan to exist, and we need to understand more about the plan we inherited before we start changing it. So thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on to our general business. First item up, PC Resolution 35, 2018, PC Resolution to extend the the boundary, I should say, of Subdistrict 3 in the downtown Littleton design standards. Could we have a staff presentation?
Yes, good evening, Chair and Planning Commission. We have a quick presentation for you. We actually don't have a PowerPoint for you, but just in your packet there is a map which shows Subdistrict 3 in the downtown design standard area. That's primarily from Main Street north along Prince to Santa Fe. And as you do know, earlier this year, there was a technical committee that had worked with an architectural firm, Bryant Flink Architect, for several months to bring forward amendments to the adopted in 2006 Downtown Littleton Design Standards and Guidelines. That amendment came forward and was approved by City Council earlier this summer to turn them into the Downtown Design Standards. And so now applications that are submitted to the city must comply with all the standards in there. That technical committee that had been formed to help facilitate this process, which did include several public meetings, one of the recommendations that they presented to staff sort of as a next phase, there's a list of them, but one of those is to extend the boundary of the Subdistrict 3 to include the properties on the, well, first to include there's a small portion of the Riverbend retail operations on the southern side of Prince and Santa Fe, small piece there, and to go across the street to also include the property to the north of Santa Fe and Prince. So that is the proposal before you this evening. We did have one comment relative to there is a pending application, as you heard in public comment, on this property. And so working with the attorney, we do have one amendment that we would like to include into the document, and I'd like to read that for you. The proposed boundary extension would not be applicable to the existing development application that is in the city's development review process and has received the first round of review comments. It is important to note, however, that this application is subject to the downtown neighborhood plan, which also references design and character elements to be met for this location. Also, in the future, any new development application for an expansion of the footprint of an existing building in this location would be subject to these design standards, as specified in the Littleton Downtown Design Standards. Additionally, any future sign permit applications would also be subject to these downtown Littleton Design Standards. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions for staff? Anyone can start. Dan?
So is it true, or how many parcels are CDOT parcels? Do we know that? And would CDOT be required to follow our design standards?
If any development were to occur on any of the properties that we're proposing to add, then yes, that is accurate. The one private parcel, the main private parcel is the 1.2 acre parcel that was just made, or that was mentioned during public comment.
Okay. So CDOT has to follow our rules.
Let me weigh in on that. Technically, CDOT is responsible and has control over the right-of-way, but what makes this situation kind of unique? CDOT is in the beginning stages of doing what we call a planning and environmental linkages study. The common acronym is PEL. And the intent of that is to analyze the long-term future of Santa Fe Drive. And as part of that, yes, they will then look at the city's design standards in terms of that PEL to outline the long-term future of Santa Fe Drive. If we don't have any standards, then essentially CDOT takes the position, we'll do what we want in our right-of-way, thank you very much.
So they may or may not develop it. It may just be part of the right-of-way.
It could
Yeah,
stay as part of the right-of-way.
Primarily, the current use of their property is generally the right-of-way that gets up to this parcel, sort of like a frontage area.
Well, and I think with the amendment, it sounds like that clears up some issues for the person that spoke earlier. I had a question whether or not the design guidelines would impose any further sort of restrictions than what sort of the native zoning is there. It's not really in an area plan right now, that location. What design guideline, I mean, if somebody were to apply to do a development there, what design guidelines would they have to follow, if any at all?
Dan, I think we're talking about design standards.
Standards,
not
excuse me.
guidelines.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Well, currently, there is, for the entire downtown area of Littleton, there's the downtown neighborhood plan, which is different and separate from the downtown design standards. So any application would have to meet, and it outlines some general requirements relative to architecture and character of the historic downtown area as being a requirement for this property already.
Okay. So, so I see if any future development or architecture would be, if this is included in this sub-area, would be more in character with some of the other adjacent development to the south. So, okay, I get it. I'm good.
So just to clear up for me, your amendment stated that the current development proposal wouldn't be subject to the sub-area 3 downtown design standards if it does, this resolution does pass?
Specifically to the downtown design standards, that's accurate. However, it still would be subject to the downtown neighborhood plan, which does articulate some character and architectural elements relative to its location as one on the north side of the entrance along Prince Street.
Okay, thank you.
David?
Just a couple questions. Does the amendment that you just proposed, is that a proposed amendment, or is that, are you tacking that on to the resolution?
Staff would be requesting that this would be an amendment that if you all decide to approve this, that you would articulate that we would then include within the district expansion.
Okay, so that's something we have to provide a motion on, but we have an opportunity to bring forth the resolution without the amendment, is that what you're saying?
We would recommend that you include it.
I'm just asking a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, so we're asking that you include it.
But that didn't answer my question. Is if we make a motion, can we make a motion without the amendment, or are we required to have the amendment included in the motion?
Commissioner, I think at this point you could make a motion to adopt the resolution with the staff presented amendment. You don't have to move the item to the floor and then do the amendment. You could simply make the motion at this point with the staff recommended language as part of the motion.
Or not?
Or not.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. Okay, and then does the city have any plan for that entrance from Prince Street, signage-wise or beautification-wise? I mean, you had mentioned, at least, I don't know if I saw it this time, but in the last one, you had mentioned as a reason for bringing this forward, that this is kind of an entrance to the downtown, so that's why you wanted to include it in those standards.
Yes, we don't specifically have any recommendations for what that would look like, but as you know, in the Bellevue corridor vision, one of the implementation items in that document talks about creating the connection, Prince Street from Bellevue to Santa Fe, across Santa Fe, then down into Main Street. So I believe that there's some intention to talk about what additional features and elements would we want as an entrance into our downtown. And secondly to that, once the city needs to work with CDOT relative to that PEL project, we'll want to, through the comprehensive plan, have some conversations about the functionality of Prince from Santa Fe into downtown and what that looks like from an entranceway.
Okay, thanks.
Greg?
Sure. The map that's included with the application, the design standards extension map, appears that I count like 6 lots. It looks like 6 parcels in there, not just the 2. I guess the other 4 would be CDOT, or is that map accurate? Looks like there's a number of parcels in there. So, okay. So
That would be accurate.
okay. So there's more than just the 2, but the other ones are owned by CDOT. I know the 2012 downtown neighborhood plan included some requirements for this area. Did the 2006 design guidelines that predated the current update, did that address that area specifically, or?
It did not.
Okay. And then, so the way I understand it, that these, if this motion was to be approved, it wouldn't impact the current development application, but it would impact any future. Say that developer went away and somebody else came in, or the lots were reconfigured as part of a CDOT project. Could you just really briefly summarize what additional development restrictions would be associated with any development on this site under the downtown design standards? I understand it's trying to get to a more walkable scale along the street, more city entry. Can you briefly summarize what other things they might have to do differently than
In addition to the ones that you just offered?
Yes.
Things like materials and how materials are presented and shown on the side of the building, things like that, to really get to the detail. If you think about it, the neighborhood plan, right, is the higher up plan, and then the design standards are pretty specific around what you need to do for entryways, walkways, the types of materials used, the roof lines, and things like that.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Sherry, you next, before I forget.
My comment is more just perhaps for in the future, it would have been helpful to have had a picture, not just the lines, to see exactly where the property was that you're asking to be included, and perhaps also to include the zoning and the property in it, just so we had a better idea of how that property was going to be affected. But just to reiterate, so the present app will not be required to do anything additional, just future applications.
That's correct. And the map, we did intend to show in that black highlighted area, the area that would be included in the sub-district boundary.
Yeah, I see that. It would be helpful to actually have it's a picture, but I mean, an aerial of it. So you could have seen what was there now and also whose property is in that area, just to give us better idea. That's all. Thanks.
I think for some background context for some of our guests who aren't regulars at some of these meetings, the city's zoning map, or any city's zoning map, stipulates what can be built in a certain area. So as long as an applicant, in this case the client of the attorney who's proposing to build a hotel, comes in and is willing to build something that is allowed by the zoning on that parcel, and the B3 is a business zone, it's a commercial kind of zone, and it allows certain specifications with regard to height, setbacks from the street, mass of the structure, and so forth and so on. They can do that. They don't need to, as long as they submit the plans to the city staff and they get a building permit, they can do whatever they want. It's called use by right, because they have the right to do what they want to do with their parcel in accordance with the established zoning. What we're talking about here is design standards that basically the city has stipulated we want certain things in terms of facades and design, architectural design attributes, in order to make new construction integrate well with the existing character of the community up and down this whole corridor. And in that context, I guess a question I had was with the fact that they're doing a B3 project, and we're stipulating that because they had put an application in before we were considering the change in the rules for the design standards, I'm just wondering, from staff's perspective, is the design that they've proposed reasonably consistent with the neighborhood plan, as you indicated, and does it look like it's reasonably accommodative, notwithstanding it might not be entirely accommodative to the attributes that are in the design standards that would apply into the future?
Well, honestly, that's the nature of development review and the process in and of itself, right? So an application is submitted, then city staff weighs it against our existing requirements. We provide them comments, and that's where we're at right now. And so generally what happens is the applicant then takes those comments into consideration, and then they resubmit to further meet our comments. So that's where we're at relative to the project.
Okay.
And as you know, any project, in order to obtain approval, right, needs to work through that until that staff satisfactorily finds that all of those requirements have been met. So we're in the process of the review right now.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess essentially then, thank you for that. I guess I might have assumed that perhaps the process was further along. It's not, that's fine. And I appreciate your comments in that regard, so thank you. And that's it.
I'm not quite crystal on a couple of things, so pardon me if others have asked the same questions. Official application has been made for this property, is that correct?
That's correct.
How long ago was that made?
Earlier this summer.
Okay, so quite a while. So if we extend the sub-area 3 to, especially to this 1.65 acre property, they're not bound by the downtown standards, but they're bound by other standards that are already in place. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So in the future, if they make a change, tear it down, build something else, add an addition, then they would have to conform to the downtown standards.
Correct.
Okay. Did you dig through the dusty archives and find out why was this property left in no man's land way back when? Do you have any idea why?
We attempted to do some research. We could not find an answer to that.
Probably have to talk to some old planners that have since moved on.
From like 2005, 2006, yes.
Okay. Let's see. That's all my questions. Anything else for staff?
I've got one.
Just a question.
Oh.
Do you want to go first?
Go ahead, John.
Sure. This is related to what specific changes would be necessary to the downtown design standards document in relation to this resolution. And it looks like because we reformatted it, that it's going to be fairly simple to change the document. To me, it looks like on page 7, there's a couple air photos that might need to have a new boundary put on them. The sub-area map on page 10 would be changed to show the extension to sub-area 3. And then, of course, the page on describing sub-area 3 would need to be changed. And I believe that would be the bulk of the changes, if not all of them. Is that correct? Has staff looked at what that would entail?
Yes, that sounds like the summary that we also looked at.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
Robin?
Just adding on to what Mark was asking about, if they did a future change to whatever they're building, the hotel, would the whole building have to come in compliance, or just say there was an addition or a change?
It would obviously depend on what it is, but in your second example, if the hotel stays the way it's built, let's just say it gets to that point, and they want to add an addition, it would be the addition specifically that would be required to follow those standards.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Dave, want to make the motion?
Somebody want to make a motion?
No, go ahead.
Well,
All right.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
You're stuck.
Come on, man.
I'll do the next one.
Okay.
Attaboy. I move to approve PC Resolution 35-2018 to amend the downtown Littleton design standards and extend the boundary of Subdistrict 3 to the intersection of Prince and Santa Fe with the following, with the condition as articulated by staff in their modifications to the resolution presented earlier.
That's it. Okay.
Capo.
Seems a little nebulous.
No?
Okay.
I mean, I'm basically approving the boundary extension as quote-unquote amended. I wouldn't use the word amend,
Okay.
but it's modified by the staff
Okay.
description.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a second? Discussion? We can go up and down the line. Sherry, you want to start first?
I don't really have a lot of input on it, other than since the parcel really does, at this point, have only one area that's approaching development, it seems reasonable, I guess, to include it in District 3. But other than that, I don't have a lot of comment.
Craig?
The biggest concern I had with the resolution was its potential impact on the private property that exists there, and I think the modification eliminated that in my mind. So I see this as something that's in the best interest of the city to sort of capture this area as a gateway into the downtown area. I think it should have been included originally in the design standards. It perhaps was an oversight. So I would support the resolution.
As included on the staff notes about how part of our citywide plan does create distinctive gateways to the city, its downtown, other points of interest, this definitely fits into that category. I'm sorry that the present applicant had a lot of confusion surrounding it, and that part's unfortunate. But with the changes that you have made so that this application is not affected unjustly, I think this is also for the benefit of the city.
Dan? Sorry.
I agree with what's been said so far. I think creating a distinctive gateway makes sense, and that seems like to be the other sort of bookend across the street from where the signage is now. So I think I'm in support of extending the district.
I agree. I think it's appropriate that this extension should be included in the design standards, and the having that gateway addressed in the future with those type of additional guidelines and standards would be beneficial to the city. And hopefully the developer of the property would also take into consideration the intent of the city and its desire to have a consistent development approach in the city, even though it wouldn't necessarily be required based on that amendment. But hopefully they could still take a look at that and see if there's anything of value that they could include in their development that would be a bonus.
Yeah, I agree. I think it seems like it was an oversight that this area was left off the design standards originally, and I also would hope that the developer would look at the design standards and try to incorporate as much as possible, them into their development, because that's kind of the spirit of this. It's been like I said, it was an oversight, and then staff has been contemplating this for a while. So I'm also glad to see more parcels owned by CDOT get into a situation where they have to consider at least the city's wishes, when they make changes or developments or whatever they might do with this parcel and any other parcel that affects the city directly or even indirectly.
Yeah, I agree with my learned colleagues. I think the resolution is warranted. I'll support it. I did want to close the loop. For our guests, I did indicate before that if you build something on a parcel, it's in accordance with the zoning, it's used by right. If you decide to try to build something that's not allowed by the zoning code, then you have to come in and request a rezoning hearing or potentially a plan development overlay type of hearing. And I think we're going to have one of those, fallout from one of those in a little bit. But just to close the loop, that not everything is, people can't ask to do other things, but if they ask to do other things, it's not used by right. So that's it.
I agree with all my colleagues. I'll say that we worked long and hard on the downtown design standards. 85% of the requirements are just any good architect or any good developer would do just as a matter of course, and good workmanship and stewardship. So I also say, please look at the guidelines, and you'll have or I should say the standards. You will get a better project, and by the way, if you have a better looking project, you'll make more money. This is one of the main gateways into Littleton and requires attention to quality and detailing. River Bend, your neighbor across the street, has set a good example. Hope that you can complement them with the development of this hotel on that 1.65 acre property. So I'm also in favor of the motion. Any other comment? See none. Time to vote.
The vote's unanimous and the motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to our next item. PC Resolution 41-2018, resolution for Envision Littleton 2040 report. Could we have the staff presentation, please? I think down from the well here.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, Chairman Rudnick and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Kathleen Osher, Special Projects Manager for Envision Littleton. And it's my pleasure tonight to bring the Envision Littleton 2040 report, which contains our unifying vision and guiding principles. As you know, we began the process of imagining the next 10 to 20 years with our community back in April at the direction of City Council and this commission. We spent the last 8 months listening and collecting our shared values, concerns, and priorities for Littleton's future. The first draft of the vision and guiding principles was based on 3,000 conversations and 870 survey responses and delivered to the community for their review starting October 6th. The plan was before this commission on October 8th and again on November 13th. The final report for your consideration this evening is based on thousands of conversations and reviews. We also received 3 written comments, which have been printed for you this evening. And to close, I would like to share a 3-minute video that our team, including our communications department, produced about the Envision process.
Very beautiful place to live in.
No parking meters downtown. Keep it that way.
Because we've lived here our whole lives. We love Littleton. It's a great city.
One of the things that we understood early on with Envision Littleton is that in many ways, we as a community are held to a higher standard. There were incredible civic leaders and founders of this city that we really had to build on their shoulders. They've done some amazing heavy lifting through the years to create a beautiful and iconic city. And so it's really an understanding that Littleton is already a great place. How do we take advantage of keeping it?
One thing that has really struck me during our time here in Littleton is really how passionate the people that live here are about their city. They may not always agree on the why or the how, but that community feeling of we all are here for Littleton and we all believe in the future of Littleton really came through to me.
Small town, but it's an exciting place to live, great people.
It's just such a friendly community, and that there's a lot of people who are close to each other, and all of the businesses are so local.
Working through this vision process, we've come to a short list of frankly, some key words that we try to focus both from the elected official to your residents on that capture what Littleton's about, what it hopes to be in the future. And it's words like being an active community, which gets to things like health and fitness. Also a very eventful city where you can gather, go to concerts, go to different events in the community. And then there's words like being an anchored place, an authentic place. That really came through in our conversations that Littleton is real. It's not a master plan community that was built over a period of years. It was built over many decades.
I like the city of Littleton because it's a small city that has a lot to offer.
And I think they do a great job of communication and getting the community involved, and lots of activities and events, and they just make it a fun place to be.
As we went through the process of creating a vision and set of guiding principles, obviously the most important thing we can do is get great input. So the fact that we could have almost 3,000 conversations, that we could have 870 survey responses, that we could be visible in over 50,000 partner newsletter email addresses, that were showing up in people's inboxes in their email, that we could have that kind of awareness was super important to building the long-term relationship. But the other commitment that we as a city wanted to make is that it doesn't just stop with getting that input. What we want to do is take the plan back out when it's still in draft to say, did we get it right? So these 5 guiding principles allow us to use them almost like a filtration system. And the best analogy as we went out and talked to the community that became very clear is, could we treat these 5 lenses like lenses of a camera and think about them in that sense of filtering, so that when we really talk about how decisions and projects deliver on each of those 5 lenses, that we understand we as a community can stay clear and we can be in focus. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Kathleen or the rest of the staff? Speak up, anyone? Go ahead.
I just had one. It would have been nice to have received this before the meeting started.
Yes. You're speaking of the letters.
Yes, the additional comments, I guess. I do know the tremendous amount of work you put into this and how you just drilled down into the community, getting down deeper and deeper and deeper. Really appreciate that. I think that was phenomenal. Having been through reiteration and reiteration and reiteration, I'm very comfortable with going forward without having read this, though of course I would have preferred to, because there's always going to be more comments, always more things that could potentially be changed. At some point you say, this is it. But yeah, just in the future, just so we can get that a little sooner. But thank you.
And I think our desire was really to make sure that we had as long a comment period as we could. So we actually closed that on Friday. So yeah, that was a little last minute in getting those to you. So yeah, I appreciate
or maybe
your,
just
yeah.
Sending out to us on Friday just to have the opportunity to read, or even this morning, just
Absolutely.
because we really appreciate any citizen who wants to make a comment is really important for us to be able to read and respect that. But again, I really appreciate the work you did. It was amazing to watch.
Thank you.
Anyone? Just go ahead and jump in. Questions for staff? No? Any other questions down here? David?
I think we've covered this ad infinitum.
Yes, we have.
I think this latest draft is just some minor changes from last time, if I'm correct.
Yeah, it looks like you included more specifics about the South Platte River, which was a comment from the last
Yeah, I saw that.
work session, so kudos, nice work.
To add some infinitum?
Sure. That's what we do.
That's what we do, yes.
I guess I had a couple questions. I think the map on page 11, which shows where survey response locations were provided, is illustrative. It seems there's great dispersion throughout the community. Is the number of responses, could you speak a little bit about what the number of responses for our effort here was relative to maybe what would be a baseline in other communities that you've seen?
And huge interest of mine, right? Because want it to be more. So actually, we did some analysis. It's a little difficult sometimes with other cities and our neighbors, but many of them have been through both a comprehensive plan, some work on vision or guiding principles. So, what you can learn from that is that for most of them, it's just under 0.5% of population. So this number is actually 2% of population. So a very credible number. I think the other number that was really relevant in my mind was every 2 years we do a resident and business survey. So I believe that last number for the 2018 resident survey was 759, and that is a statistically viable sampling source. So that gave me a lot of confidence in the 870. The mapping for us was also a great opportunity to do a very constant check. When we had 200 surveys, were we already seeing that distribution, or were we starting to see clusters? Were there neighborhoods, like a trail mark, for example, were we hearing from them? So we could see that and keep monitoring that throughout the process. So I think those were important tools. One piece that will become very, I think, interesting as part of our comprehensive plan work, hopefully next year, is that many of these created sort of story maps. Right, like these dots can tell a story based on demographic data or based on other priorities or concerns. So that'll be a really great tool for us to start to have some of that conversation as we get deeper and deeper into the details with the comprehensive plan.
Okay, good. There was a suggestion that some of this data might be weighted towards people potentially who had a particular interest in a particular outcome. Do you get any sense, based on your assimilation of the entire project to date, that there's any sort of bias in terms of the data, that it's all pro-development, or, I mean, we heard the video and there's comments about, pluses and minuses, for certain attributes, but broadly speaking, at a 10,000 foot level, do you get the sense that there's any sort of quote unquote a statistical bias in the data that would be less than pretty much a normal distribution?
Yeah, and no. I think what we saw consistently was that there were a lot of very similar themes. And I was asked by some of our partners, like, did you see that commonality? Is that always a part of the Littleton experience? When I, presented this plan in front of the South Suburban Board of Directors, for example. And so one of the members of the board asked me that question, and I said, well, at the end of the day, what it clearly showed me is that the citizens and residents and people who spend time and love Littleton have way more in common than they do that sets them apart. And so I didn't really see that bias as we were starting to collect the survey responses, and I think that continued to be part of the process. I think we did the best possible job to not rely solely on the survey results, but also have those 3,000 conversations where that becomes really important to get more context and really understand where there is agreement, where there are going to be some challenges when we start to get into the details of thinking about the next 10, 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? I have 3 minor edits that I would hope would be part of the motion. Page 4, under shared priorities, the first bulleted item, park trails and open space, in parentheses, along the South Platte River canals and creeks and elsewhere. The word elsewhere sounds to me like, a teenager or whatever. I would like to change that within the neighborhoods, rather than just the nebulous elsewhere. Like I say, fairly minor edit. Page 7, if it clears up for me. There we go. There's 2 edits. Under building on recent and earlier efforts in Littleton, the last bulleted point, Littleton downtown design standards and guidelines. that should read Littleton Downtown Design Standards. They're no longer guidelines.
Thank
So
you.
if you would change that. And right underneath there, you do say earlier comprehensive plans, both adopted and unadopted. Under that, I would like to add earlier corridor studies, both adopted and unadopted. We have several of those, some which were adopted, some which were abandoned. They all do have value. Some of them are over 20 years old, but still have some value. For instance, Broadway or Littleton Boulevard corridor study. Those were two that were approved by Planning Commission, not accepted or adopted by, maybe they were just accepted by council but not adopted. So I would like that included. Those are my only three edits. There's no other questions for staff. Do we have a motion? And you promised.
I didn't promise, but I will do it. I move to approve PC Resolution 41-2018, which forwards a favorable recommendation to City Council for the adoption of the Envision Littleton 2040 report, predated December 18, 2018, which includes the unifying vision and guiding principles and direction to the Envision team to then work together with the City Council to update the city's comprehensive plan in 2019. With the proviso that we include Mr. Rudnicky's additional minor edits. And if you'd like me to reiterate those, I can. You got 'em. Okay.
We have a second?
Second.
Craig seconded. Any discussion? Final comments, anyone?
I think this has been a great process for, oh, sorry.
No, please.
For Littleton and engaging the community. There's been tremendous effort put into engaging the community and soliciting and gathering and reviewing and understanding input and comments from community members. And I think that's to be commended. And it shows in the report as being a very solid document that will help Littleton plan its futures.
Yeah, I agree with Robin and John in that regard. I think the not only the amount of work, but the quality of the work that's gone into this is extraordinary. We've said all along, I think Mark, your comment was we didn't want you to be the driver, but we did want you to be the chauffeur, I think is how you phrased it. And it's the community's plan, it's the citizens' plan, and I think the stewardship of that is in good hands at this juncture and is going to be the foundation for a very strong comprehensive plan redo this coming year.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll chime in. In the years that I've been in this planning commission, I've been to quite a few sort of citizen meetings, neighborhood meetings, through surveys, and this is probably the most comprehensive thing to come out of any of those, and it just shows how much effort has gone into it, and I am very appreciative of staff, the current staff, that we are actually moving forward and bringing some of these things to the table into completion, whereas in the past, some of these things just kind of sat on a shelf, and you wonder why we went through all the effort to begin with. So we've got a great document here that I think is a testament to that. So thank you.
I'm going to explain my driver-chauffeur comment that I made many months ago. By chauffeur, I wanted staff and our consultant that we hired from Texas to be chauffeurs of this process. I wanted the citizens of Littleton to be the drivers of this process. And this, I feel, has happened, and I'm very appreciative that it has. I'm impressed by the gathering of the information that took place. It was well done. Again, it's written by our citizens, not our consultants. Some of our past efforts have been more written by consultants and planning commissions than citizens. So I am enthusiastic supporter of both the process and the product that has resulted. It will be a good, this document will be a good jumping off point for tackling the hard work coming up in the next 9 months, and that is tackling the detailed comprehensive plan itself. Any other comments?
Yeah, I would just like to add that I'd like to recognize Kathleen's work and the city staff that's worked on this, and Ken Keast for, I've read a lot of these high-level vision documents, and this one's really well written. I think it's creatively put together. It's interesting to look at. I think it communicates to the wider audience, not just us planning wonks. And I think it reflects the public input very well. I recognize it's at a very high level still, and I don't feel like I participated in the process as much as I would have liked to during the visioning process, but I very much look forward to participating in the comp plan and the transportation plan that's part of it in the next year, so kudos.
Any other comments? It is time to vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Well, that's 9 months of work, 8 months of work. On to the next stage. Wonderful. Okay. Next item up is a public hearing, PC Resolution 38-2018. A resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Littleton, Colorado concerning a sketch plan for duplex building located at 5556 and 5558 South Sycamore Street. Since this is the public hearing, we'll go through the ritual of who has visited the site, and have you talked to anybody while you were visiting the site? Kathleen, I'm sorry, Jerry, we'll start with you. Kathleen wants to chime in.
Yes. I did drive by the site and looked at it. I did not speak to anyone.
Okay.
I've been by the site in the past, but not recently, and haven't spoke to anybody.
I did not.
I've been by the site actually today, but did not speak with anyone.
Okay. I specifically visited the site twice in the last 3 days, did not talk to anyone.
I have not visited the site or talked to anyone.
I visited the site on the way to this meeting. That's why I was here 30 seconds before it started, and did not speak with anyone.
I did visit the site, and I did not speak with anybody.
Okay, thank you. We'll now do our, our staff report. Who's going to speak? Okay.
Thank you, Planning Commission.
You could
Good
speak
evening.
directly into that microphone.
Indeed. Good evening, and I am Carl Sauger. I will be presenting on behalf of Community Development Department. This is a appeal of a staff denial of the sketch plan for 5556 and 5558 South Sycamore. So the modifications made in the sketch plan during construction did not match the building permit, site development plan, or plan development overlay, or PDO plan, and were not, as the PDO was approved through a public hearing process. One of the requirements for approval of a sketch plan by staff is that the modifications were not conditions of approval through a public hearing. The applicant now seeks to approve the sketch plan by Planning Commission permitting those modifications. So I will explain the process of how we got to this point, followed by the application details detailed in that sketch plan as compared against the SDP, PDO, and building permit, the review criteria, and then recommendation and commission action. First, the plan development overlay was approved by the Planning Commission on July 25th, 2016, after a public hearing. The site development plan was approved administratively on October 7th of 2016, and the building permit was issued on October 31st of 2016. The sketch plan, and I apologize for the formatting there, was denied by administratively on November 16th of 2018. The appeal was filed, and now the action is to either approve, deny, or table to a date certain. So this duplex, the site development plan and PDO detailed 2 duplexes. Only the southernmost duplex was built. The zone is CA PDO, and it is subject to the sub-area 2 design standards. And with that, the PDO, SDP, and building permits all matched each other, showing certain details such as travertine tile, railings on the front porch, and other details. So the 5 modifications as detailed by the sketch plan. The first was to replace the siding material on the front elevation from travertine tile to stucco. The second was the removal of the front porch railing. The third element modified the design of the front columns. The fourth modified the corner window on the west-south elevation. And the fifth was a minor modification adjusting the height of the eaves by 9 inches. I will go into additional detail on each of these modifications. And from the other to the south and east elevations, the replacement of the Tugg travertine tile to stucco, the design of the columns, the corner window on the southwest elevation, and the modification of the eaves. First is a comparison of the travertine tile, which was replaced by stucco during the course of construction. On the right is an example of travertine tile as applied to a different property. Next is the removal of the front porch railing. On the right is the approved PDO, SDP, and building permit on the west elevation. The third was modifying the design of the front columns, and on the far right is the close-up of what was displayed on the approved PDO, SDP, and building permit plans. The fourth is the display of what appears to be a corner window from the PDO, SDP, and building permit plans on the right, and what was replaced with 4 standard windows. And the final is a modification to the roof plan, which raised the middle eave by 9 inches. This did not further extend the eave into the setback, nor did it increase the total building height, and this relatively minor modification would have generally been approved administratively by staff during the process. So to wrap up, the replacement of siding material, the removal of the front porch railing, the modification of the front design columns, and the modification of the corner window. I will note that the raising of the eaves is not apparent from the street and wasn't actually even recognized by myself during site inspection until it was brought to my attention on the sketch plans. So the grounds for staff denial, the modifications in the sketch plan could not be part of a condition approved through a public hearing process, which is why I had to deny the sketch plan fully. And then the requirements for the PDO approval originally was that the had creative, high-quality design, reinforced citywide and neighborhood objectives, and did not impair the intent of the code. So the action by the commission tonight is to either approve the sketch plan, thus authorizing those modifications made during the course of construction, approve the sketch plan with modifications, so taking some or all of those, or denying the sketch plan, thus bringing those, making the original PDO, SDP, and building permit a condition of those details need to be added to that or modified. So. Thank you.
That's it? Okay. Questions for staff? Craig, start with you.
Yes. If, as I understand it, the sketch plan was submitted after the building was constructed, and the appeal was then to modify the building permit, if these modifications were proposed prior to construction as an administrative revisions to the building permit, what would have been the submittal and review process?
If I could speculate, it would be that before construction, we would have had the applicant go back through a public hearing process to amend the PDO, as these details were shown specifically on that plan.
Okay, that's all I have for now.
Okay.
Robin?
So, being as this has already happened and here we are, other than our actions here, if this is whether it's denied, approved, or tabled, or whatever, is there another possibility for them to come before another public hearing to request these changes as an amended PDO?
Commissioner Mike Sutherland, I'm the planning manager. The modification is to the site development. The sketch plan is a modification to the site development plan. In this case, the site development plan was an exact match for the plan development, the elevation shown in the plan development overlay. We didn't see that there was any need for a modification to the plan development overlay as such, but this sketch plan would be adequate as a modification of the site development plan if it met your approval. How's that for an answer?
So, what would happen under the circumstances, say it was denied? Would they have to go fix everything? Or is there another process where they could ask for a public hearing and make changes?
So this is a final decision by the city. This exhausts the, and I'll defer to Mr. Kemp if I make a mistake here, but this is a final decision by the city. If you approve the sketch plan, they would need to modify the building permit and we could issue a CO. If you were to deny the sketch plan or deny portions of the sketch plan, the applicant would either have to modify the building and potentially modify the building permit before we could issue a CO, or the applicant could resolve or appeal to the court system.
Okay, so going to the 5 modifications. As you said in your staff notes, the stucco would actually meet our design standards.
That is correct.
And the applicant said their reason for changing it was they found out that there could be some issues with the travertine and it might fall off under certain conditions. And their desire to change to the stucco was to alleviate that problem.
That is correct.
We have not, they said that removing the porch railing was I'm not saying this right, looked better. That's not quite right.
So I believe the letter of intent detailed 2 explanations for it. One was that because there was less than a 12-inch grade change between the front porch and the ground, it was not required by the building code, and then subsequently justified their decision by saying that it was more, I believe, open to the street or more inviting, or some semblance thereof.
No comments on the other 3 as far as we know at this point.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the applicant is here tonight to make his own presentation, so.
Well, I think Robin asked certainly one of the questions that I was interested in, which is, you know, what are the practical alternatives at this juncture? I guess I'd ask the city attorney, since the PDO was approved in a public hearing and absent a Rule 106 challenge, which in so many words indicates we did something that was above and beyond or exceeded our authority. Appealing to a court to set aside hypothetically whatever's done tonight would have to be done again, I guess, with respect to a Rule 106 complaint. And what's your assessment of that?
My assessment would be, yes, that would be the way it would have to be done. I think here the intent of the PDO was that you would meet the requirements of the PDO. When the sketch plan was submitted, it didn't meet the requirements of the PDO. And so the staff action was to deny the sketch plan. The applicant is going to have to show that the staff acted either arbitrarily, capriciously, or unreasonable in making that denial. I think the intent was, if, okay, you want to change the materials on the PDO, then what your options were was either to come in and amend the PDO to reflect the new materials, but you can't really suddenly try to use the sketch plan. The intent, the PDO has this reference to a sketch plan. It's kind of convoluted because it makes reference to a sketch plan. The sketch plan itself technically isn't appealable, but then the PDO, there's this other language that says you get to appeal it in the manner of a plan development. And how to sort of make sense of all this is you basically get to come here and appeal whether the staff action was arbitrary, unreasonable, and capricious in rejecting the staff plan.
Okay, all right. Thank you, I appreciate that. I think staff was getting to this point, or was touching on it certainly with the presentation, but my understanding of a PDO rezone is essentially that it allows for a change in use from the previous zoning, but is usually more restrictive than a standard rezoning. Its intent is to permit diversification of uses, provided that such uses are in harmony with the surrounding neighborhood and must not be jeopardizing or reduce zoning standards in the area, and should promote the general welfare of the community. The essence of a PDO is a deal, an exchange of flexibility by the local government for extra quality amenities or something else the community would not otherwise get from the developer. That's a quote from page 86 of Colorado Land Planning and Development Law book, which comes in handy on occasion. It's not, it's, I'm sure it's something Mr. Kemp has memorized.
Yes.
And I would just offer to that, remember the PDO is not actually a rezoning, but the PDO allows you to
Correct.
provide relief to development standards in exchange for high quality design. So just to clarify that.
So I mean, I guess the context there though is if in good faith, the Planning Commission approves in a public hearing a PDO, and then the PDO is not adhered to, it kind of subverts the whole process. The idea that we were getting something in exchange for giving something is basically we gave something and didn't get what we thought we were getting in return.
Not to speak for everyone, but I'm going to, and then you guys jump in. So remember, the purpose of the PDO was they gave you an idea of what that design would look like, and then through the site development plan and the building permit is when they actually submitted to us, to staff, to verify that was of how they were meeting the intent behind that PDO with the high quality design requirement. So the sketch plan in for you this evening, the question is, do you feel any of the proposed changes that they've made, do they still meet the intent of that approved PDO? That's the question before you, and whether or not you want to either recommend approval or denial of those elements.
No, and that's helpful, but the original PDO did or did not stipulate specific materials like the travertine tile?
Yes, they did.
The PDO did stipulate, and that was also mentioned in their presentation to Planning Commission in 2016. I will say, I think it also just staff, whether or not these were conditions of approval through a public hearing process or they met the high quality, we didn't feel comfortable speaking for Planning Commission in making those decisions, which was another reason why this was denied and then appealed to bring it back in front of you.
Okay, good, thank you.
Dan?
I have a question on the cover sheet, A101 of the original PDO, and specifically the signature and certification blocks and language in that. Maybe you, Attorney, maybe you can help us or help me understand some of what that language is saying. It's saying that that basically, I'm going to paraphrase, excuse me here. Get my note, just a second. I guess, does the language bind the applicant to develop the property per the submitted documents? The language says that the city is granted permission to enter property to establish compliance with the development of the property, but with on-site improvements, including but not limited to landscaping, drainage, parking, et cetera. What does that not limited to mean? Is I guess what I'm getting at is there are they bound to provide the design that is in the documents?
Commissioner, members of the commission, yes, generally the term "not limited to" is meant to indicate an intent by the regulatory body to include other things that were not specified. So my position would be, it would be everything that is specified there, plus anything else that wasn't specifically specified, but is required by the code. The mere fact it wasn't specified doesn't exempt you from it.
Thank you. Okay, so actually another question there about that. So it states that if after proper notice, the developer basically says that if things are found that are not in compliance, that the city can, I guess, exercise some financial assurance. Is that true? Is that, it's like 125% of the cost? Can you tell me more about that?
Commissioners, members of the commission, we do provide for financial assurance in our code. Normally where that is used is where it involves a work that's required on a public improvement, and we want to be assured that that work is going to be done. Here, I wouldn't necessarily view that if the city had received financial assurance that we would find it appropriate to then use it to make modifications on a private building. We don't normally use the financial assurance for that. It's really to guarantee completion of public improvements.
Thank you for clarifying. I guess I have questions for the applicant, but
that can
we'll
wait shortly.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that it? John?
No questions?
My turn?
Yes. Sorry.
No worries.
Actually, I did have one other question, sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, thanks. So I just wanted to make sure I understood the normal process. So it sounds like you can make minor modifications prior to construction or during construction?
So,
or?
Normally, the sketch plan would be the process to amend or to modify a site development plan when those modifications rise to the level of requiring a full new site development plan. So if this hadn't gone through a public hearing process, this modifications would have been approved administratively. But because the underlying PDO reflected exactly the site development plan and the building permit, staff didn't feel they could approve those modifications. But without the public hearing process, this would have been handled administratively. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm just, okay, so if during construction, the sky blue paint that they wanted to paint the building was like no longer available, what can I do?
So depending on also the level of, if it raises to a planning or just a building modification, some of those can be red lines on a building permit, or, you know, in the case of the material changes, those probably we would have probably sent them through a sketch plan process to have those reflected, so that the final, basically to amend the site development plan.
Okay. Okay, I have no further questions for staff. Thank you.
David.
Okay, so just a couple things. On the railing, I'm assuming it's true, because I haven't heard anything to the contrary, that's correct, that railing is not required by code.
That is correct.
Okay. And I want to ask this question, but I feel like I need to say that you can decline to answer, because throughout this staff report, it seems like you've been very careful not to make any recommendation, but typically when we approved this PDO, you would have made a recommendation. So my question is, would you have recommended the PDO be approved as it stands today if it were coming through initially today, or back then, but with these changes to the sketch plan?
Thank you, Commissioner. That is a difficult question to ask, because we go back in time to a point even before the standards were standards. They were guidelines at that point.
Right.
So I think the proper question would be, does the commission feel that the changes made are high quality? And staff felt that was an appropriate question for the commission, rather than the way that this was presented in the plan development overlay, the site development plan, and the building permits. Staff felt that was more an appropriate question for the commission than staff. And as far as the recommendation goes, if you feel that these are high quality, we do too.
Okay. That's what I expected to hear. Thanks.
Nice to be the arbiter. Sherry? Could you speak in the microphone, Sherry?
Turn my mic on. Were there any public comments that you received? Did see any in the packet?
I do not believe we received any comments, no.
Okay. I have, yes, I did. Okay. I have no comments for staff or questions. If there's no other comments or questions for the staff, seeing none, move on to applicant presentation. If you could state your name, address, how do you fit in this puzzle?
You bet. Thank you, Commission. I'm Dan
Can
Pearson.
you speak directly into the microphone as best you can?
Get up here a little taller for me. I'm Dan Pearson. I live at 6 Bradbury Lane. I'm a Littleton resident. I'm the developer of this project. And we found out that we hadn't followed the correct process when we tried to collect our CO. Actually, a few months ago, we originally tried to collect our CO in January of this year, and attempted several times to get it. We finally paid a personal visit to Mike's department. Mike has been really good about helping us get through this process, but we ultimately found out that we were denied for our CO because of these changes. When the changes were made, we went to the building department and got the stucco inspected and approved. These changes, like the height of the eave, had to be changed per the building department because we could not meet the energy code with the lower heel height on the trusses along that eave. So all of these changes were done with the building department in mind. We did not realize we had to go through a public hearing to make these changes. And as the building department came through, inspected, and approved these, we thought that we had gone through the correct process. I'd like to address each one, if I may. First one is the tile, the Travertine tile, and we found out that our contractor would not warranty this because of the freeze-thaw experience that we have in our climate here in the Littleton area. He says, anything vertical and on the exterior of the home, I won't warranty because it tends to freeze-thaw through the grout and ultimately compromises the bond behind the tile. His suggestion was do a stucco with a travertine color to it. So that was what we did. Went to the building department, told them we'd made this change, got it inspected, and it passed. The railing, we did do the railings on the side and the divider between the two units on the front porch. In the front, we didn't do it because we thought it gave it a better presentation from the street, a much more inviting porch to come sit on. Also, it was no longer required because of the height the porch was off the grade. We had much less distance there than we thought we would have at the beginning of the construction project. The 3 columns in the front we modified because the architect had put 2 4x4 posts. We didn't think that had a massive enough look to support those beams. And we also felt it was the only place on the entire structure that had 2 4x4 posts. They were not in existence anywhere else architecturally on the home. We did not make that a corner window because our window manufacturer does not do that. He said they cannot produce a window structurally that joins glass to glass in his manufacturing capabilities. So we put a divider in there instead of having glass to glass in the corner. And then as I mentioned about the height of the eave on the one side, we were unable to meet the requirements of the city insulation code with the heel height of the trusses. We had to raise it 9 inches to meet that code, and we did so once again with the blessing of the building department. I'm not sure that there's anything less about these materials than we were using previously or these changes that we've made. I think it's a high quality project that has delivered the intention of the design guidelines at the time. And if we had known there was a little different process to this, we would have done this a long time ago. Even during the process, if the building department had let us know, this is the process that you need to go through to make these changes. But we were never told that, and we're given the blessing of the building department and, once again, passed all our inspections. When this issue came up with Mike, he was gracious enough to go through all the different processes we might be able to take to get this accomplished and get my CO delivered. And this was the only reasonable route he thought we could take, was to come before the commission with this sketch plan and show you what we've done and have you come by the project and see what a high quality, well-constructed project it is. So I come here through the public hearing process to try and get these changes approved. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions for the applicant? Who wants to start?
I'll go ahead, sir. Yeah, just a few questions. Thank you for your presentation. It's very helpful.
Sure, Craig.
You mentioned that the contractor wouldn't warranty the tile, the travertine tile. I was wondering, stucco to me seems a less costly alternative than any type of stone or brick or tile, travertine especially. Did you look into other types of more permanent material than stucco when you're looking at that?
We looked at cementous panel board, but it's actually the same type of material that our siding's made out of. And it gave it a panel look, but we thought it compromised the quality aspect of the project. It just didn't look the same as the stucco. There's also lines in the stucco that we created to give it more interest. So it's not just a flat panel. We tried to give it some expression and some dimension. so that it wasn't just a flat stucco. But stucco today is such a great product, and the interface between the stucco and the siding with silicone caulking really gives you a nice sealed product where moisture and freeze thaw doesn't get behind the product. So we felt that was our best alternative. And yes, the stone was a little bit more expensive. The subsurface is identical. It's what goes on the outside. So, you know, a little bit more labor and yes, a little bit more for material.
Okay. And my follow-up to that is, you know, I think with respect to the tile and the railing and the wrapped windows, to me, those all seem to be very costly details that would, you know, being in the design business, we get challenged to reduce costs along the line. Was that the intent, was to reduce costs? Or?
No, the window, for example, our manufacturer does not make a window that goes glass to glass. And we couldn't find a window maker for the type of windows we were doing in there that would do one. So we couldn't come up with that process. The stucco does save us a little bit of money. However, we were all for the Travertine at the time when the architect suggested it, but as we became aware of the liability and the inability to supply a warranty for a purchaser, we chose to go a different route.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's
yes.
all I have.
So with the Travertine, it wasn't just the manufacturer you were working with, it would have been any manufacturer you might have tried to move to?
Actually, it was in the application thereof. Okay. The material itself is fine. It's a stone product. But what happens is you attach it to a subsurface, and then you grout in the edges. And the grout area is the place where freeze and thaw can penetrate. You can seal it, but the sealing aspect of it does not hold up in the sunlight, especially. You know, it's great in a shower application or a bathroom application. But on the exterior, it just doesn't hold up well enough. And what we didn't want is for those tiles to come loose, especially being up 2 stories, and the liability that we might incur by a piece of tile coming off. We also didn't want to put out a product that wasn't going to stand the test of time. We want, as you've seen, it's a very classy product. It's a Frank Lloyd Wright prairie style of architecture. And we just didn't want to have walk by that house and look at that piece of tile that's missing, you know, and so it just seemed like the right thing to do at the time is to make this shift in philosophy.
And that is the only type of application available?
There was a cementous board that we could have done, but you get seams in that. It is made out of cement and just didn't seem to be as quality. It's about the same price. And we really couldn't come up with another application that gave it that refined look that stayed in tune with the rest of the architecture of the project.
Thank you.
Oh, Dan?
Was the architect involved with the design changes, or were they hired to do construction administration?
She was consulted when we made this change, but she was hired to do the construction drawing. She actually was here at the presentation for the first go-around, but she's out of the country.
Gotcha. So, yeah. And did she approve the changes?
She did. Mm-hmm. She liked them.
And you mentioned the tile. You didn't look at, it doesn't sound like you looked at any other materials that maybe were in the same sort of scale or color.
Color, this stucco was the same color, but scale, no, we just stayed away from that type of an application.
Okay. Even though there's porcelain tiles that can be used, you chose to use stucco.
Yeah, we felt like the porcelain just didn't give it the depth that a natural stone does. You know, it's like repeating the same tile over and over.
Okay. And then the 4x4 post column treatment, was the original intent of that detail to have that column built up, or how was that? I was just trying to look at that a little closer.
Yeah, the original column came up to that point, right. And really where we deviated is the original column had the tile on it up to the point of the 2 little 4x4 posts. They're only about this tall.
Right.
And so it's just 2 little 4x4 posts, and we thought it made more sense instead of having just those 2 posts that are nowhere else on the entire project to have something that blended with the rest of it and complemented the rest of it, and yet still gave it a strong sense of support.
Okay. And then I understand the corner window, it is challenging to find manufacturers to do that. And it is more complicated framing. So I understand that. No other questions?
I have no questions.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to talk about the columns, but you had just explained that. So I think that's about the only other question I had. So thanks.
Two things. We love acronyms. So you guys have been hearing the acronym CO, which stands for Certificate of Occupancy, which is something you have to get before anybody can move in. And it's the final sign-off the city has to, agree to what's been done. Sort of to the question Dan was asking about the corner glass. If the architect roughed this in on the drawings, ostensibly they would have had some experience with this, as in if it never works, they wouldn't draw it that way, but if they drew it that way because they'd seen it work, presumably somebody does it. Can you help me reconcile those two things?
Yeah, and I would say that we probably could have had that window custom made by somebody.
Okay.
But then that window would not have matched any other windows in the house. And, so there's two things that happen there. Number one, it's not matches the rest of the house. And number two, it would have been a very awkward looking piece from the inside. So, it was our best attempt to pull it into the corner as much as possible without having it glass to glass. So she had experience with it, but it didn't fit with the rest of the structure. And if I had thought that through earlier when she's doing that design, I probably would have mentioned, let's don't do that.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Well, I have two problems with your sketch plan.
Okay.
Let's start with the tile.
Okay.
You stated repeatedly that the 24 by 48 travertine tile was not practical. In the site development plan, it clearly calls out a 16 by 8 tile. I've never seen a 24 by 48 tile. I have seen 16 by 8s, which are much easier to put in, standard shape, and acceptable, and I've seen it installed in numerous locations. Just a cursory look-see and on the internet, tile companies' installation, plus talking to one of my subcontractors, putting that type of tile in this situation is completely acceptable if you put it in with the following: low porosity, rated for exterior use, full back buttering, which you probably know what that means, probably nobody else does.
Yeah.
Polymer modified grout, which is a special grout made for freezing and thawing, is completely acceptable. I guess I have problems with how you've massaged saying 24 by 48 when 16 by 8 has been called out. So you wish to comment?
Yeah, we wanted to go with a larger one because there's less grout lines. So there was less opportunity for that freeze thaw. And yes, that is the proper application if you're to ask AIA, the American Institute of Architects. But in our experience and the experience of our contractor, it still doesn't hold up over time. The sun does something to that the water doesn't. And it's the high UV rays and stuff that we experience here in Colorado that breaks down that sealing capacity in there, just like we see in the seals in windows and caulking, and it's all something that has to be maintained at a very high level. So we were going to go with bigger pieces so we'd have less grout lines, and then we also have to get a warranty. And
you have what?
We also want to get a warranty out of our builder, and he would not warranty that.
Well, we can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Second item, your porch railings. The other three items I have no problem with exempting. I can understand the heel height. I can understand the corner windows. What's the third one? The top of the column. It doesn't match the rest of the house with the two 4x4s. That's small potatoes.
Yeah.
Railing, Yes, you're correct, and it's not required by code. The porch is less than 30 inches above grade, blah, blah, blah. It's there for another reason, in my opinion, to give texture to the face of the building, to give a sense of ownership of the person living within that unit, and what we call defensible space. You have it's an open rail, but it gives you a sense that this is mine.
Certainly.
You put it in the corners, you put it between the units, so you've kind of done part of it. Adding that back in wouldn't break the bank. So that's.
I'd be happy to put the rails in. That was our decision.
But the tile is a bigger issue.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, thank you.
Right, thank you.
I am trying to understand more what you said about using the tiles, and I hear and agree to disagree, which makes our decision a lot harder in the sense that you have one person saying that doesn't work and one person says it does work. How do we get some confirmation which is accurate? I don't think, yes, there's always opinions, and it doesn't mean one's right, one's wrong, but considering that this was such a big part of this, to have a stronger understanding of whether that tile would work at the size being suggested, I'd like to have some more, this one person agrees, one person doesn't agree. This is a little too difficult for me. Can you please, why do you not think going to what Mark said would be acceptable?
Well, I probably have a little different experience than Mark with this type of an application, and I really trust my contractor too, that he's guiding me in the right direction. In my experience, there are very few seals that hold up over time.
When you say over time, could you express what time frame?
I would tell you that these homes we build have a 50-year lifespan, and they need to be redone and maintained. But if you ever walk on the sunny side of your house and then on the north side of your house, you'll notice that things have to be maintained differently because of our sun. Yes. And then you got your freeze and thaw. You'll notice if you have cracks in your driveway, those will grow bigger if you don't seal and fill them with the freeze and thaw. It's the same thing that happens with this application because of the grout behind it. And I trust that Mark's tile subcontractor is going through the details of what the specs say about these, but I know in my experience that what specs say and what actually happens in the field are two different things. And things don't hold up as well here at this high altitude and the sun and the freeze and the thaw. And
so how long is the time frame? I mean, if you have you're talking 50 years, but you're going to replace a lot of things in your house way before 50 years.
So I would say this grout, you'd have to seal it and protect it at least every year.
Kind of like you would do a deck where you have to seal it every year.
Yeah.
And you come in knowing that you have to deal with that.
Yeah, deck is easily accessible. This is vertical.
This is true.
And high, yeah.
But I'm looking at a material that does add a lot more, the high quality to it that was part of the PDO. So that's why I'm focusing on trying to get more information on that, because that's, as Mark said, other things are less of a big deal, but this is a big deal.
And I probably could give the stucco more lines to make it have the look of a tile. I mean, the color is right, and I could put some lines in it to give it that effect. But I think overall, this is a much better application. To me, it's a classier application. It stays in the spirit of the design guidelines that we've used and followed. So I don't think that it takes away from the project.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Terry, you have any questions? Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? I'm sorry?
No questions.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant?
It sounds like you have a great knowledge of tile, exterior tiles. So I guess my question is well, why did they propose it in the first place?
Well, it's trendy. It's definitely a trend that we're seeing a lot of. You'll see it Solterra.
And it's an exterior tile?
It's an exterior tile, and that's part of where our contractors had the experience with his tile setter, that they're having all kinds of warranty issues. in Solterra with this, and these were the reasons that they're having problems. So we want to take the experience of others instead of have the experience ourselves. It's much like, years ago when we switched from using copper into plastic water lines. Well, years ago, those didn't hold up. It was the first generation, and we've now had to go through many homes and tear that all out and replace it with a new PTEX type of application. And we're always looking for new ways to build and new ways to give a new presentation to our architecture, and this is one that's going on right now. But they don't always prove themselves out in the beginning, and we're seeing that there are some things that need to change before this application becomes a standard bearer, and we just don't want to be part of that experimental phase.
Not my intent to get into a tile debate with you.
No,
bore everybody to death. But
I'm a general contractor, but not a tile specialist.
Tile Council of America accepts there are installations methods for this type of climate, for cold weather, for freeze thaw. It takes, yes, indeed, it takes a lot more careful installation to make it work. I would submit that your siding the siding you use will be replaced probably 2 times before the tile drops off. So that has, everything will be replaced on that house eventually.
That's
repainted, fascias, et cetera. So whether it be, brick has to be repointed, siding's replaced or restained, or repainted. Tile requires effort, and you're right, it is a coming trend. Okay.
And Mark, I would tell you that if I had known that this process had to be involved, I might have made a different choice.
Yes.
I did not know. I thought by communicating with the building department, we were doing the right thing and following the right process. And it might have convinced me to do something that I wouldn't have felt good about just because of this process. But I do know that we've delivered within the spirit of the design guidelines and have delivered a high quality product that we can all be proud of as being part of our city and 2 blocks from this building. I mean, I walk by it quite often. I'm a citizen of Littleton and been building here for 30 years and have always delivered a high level quality product because I live here too.
Any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Open it up to public comment. We have a sign-up sheet with no names on it. Does anyone wish to speak on this issue? Pam? Please state your name, address, how far you live away from this room. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. You know the drill.
My name is Pam Chapborn. I live a block and a half from here, and obviously I live in this neighborhood. I think I'm a better judge of the neighborhood than someone who lives in a very exclusive neighborhood far away from downtown. Not the same. So I'm going to point out, it was great that staff asked for this to come back to you, the Planning Commission, because you approved something and it was not done. It should only come back to you, so that's good. But there's a problem that the building department did not coordinate with community development and a conditional development. So maybe corrective action needs to be taken, and I'm going to ask you to follow through with the staff on this. I think you should want to. That when you approve something with conditions, the city staff needs to be able to implement that. That was not done here. That's a failure, and please make sure that that is done. Also, the PDO proposal in this case was not feasible, according to this applicant or contractor. And it wasn't fully thought out. Well, we decided this design later would look better. That's not acceptable. It's not. And you gave your approval without knowing the trade-off for better design and materials would not be made. That is not right. And you conceded the setback. That is a huge change to the neighborhood. And we're not getting what we expected in return. And I'm going to say this does not fit the character of downtown. Frank Lloyd Wright and trendy now are not the character of downtown. That is not why we have design standards. So this violates everything. I don't agree with what was done here. And I think you should be upset about it. So let me mention, I'm in full agreement about the railings. The railings are there not for safety in this case. They're there to create a feeling in the neighborhood that should be done. And the concept that it looks better to me is not acceptable when the applicant has made an agreement with you in the city. Also, I totally thank Chair Rudnick for his expertise about tiling. Look, I'm sorry, but the Louthan guys have the pebble stuff. Do you remember the trouble that is? Yet they maintain their homes with that. I think up in Arapahoe Hills there's tiling. It's certainly possible here. That should have been done. It is not up to the applicant to make these decisions on their own. And it is up to our staff, whether it is the building department or community development, to enforce your conditional approvals. So Planning Commission, something has to be done about this. Please consider these comments. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll close the public portion of the hearing. Let's see, any last comments by the applicant? Okay. Then I'll entertain a motion in a second.
May I ask staff a question?
Ask staff? Yes, you may.
So this is new about why the applicant didn't go through the proper process about going through the building department and thinking they were doing the right thing. Why did that happen?
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, and the applicant in this case, I believe, did talk with several members of staff. We didn't have documentation of some of these conversations. Staff, there was some turnover in staff. When I first saw the final inspection for the certificate of occupancy, there was a note in we have a track-it system. There was a note in the track-it system that said on hold, but we didn't have any other notation for it. I asked Mr. Sauger to go out and inspect the property, and that's when really the first time that I noticed that there's a difference between what the Planning Commission approved and what we were seeing there, which was something you may have noticed if you walked by and remembered the hearing for the plan development overlay. So we tried to work with the applicant, who's been very good to work with in this process, to get it back to you as quickly as we could. Even I think the inspector who initially did some of the inspections and did a exterior inspection for the stucco product, I don't believe they're here anymore. So there's some gaps, and we're working on those. I think there's things we can do as a department to help ensure that this doesn't happen in the future. But we tried to catch it as early as we could, given the changes in staff, and get it back to you as early as we could, given that the applicant is anxious for this to get open and to sell the product, and so he can move forward. But yeah, I think it was sort of a lapse in documentation. I spoke to the applicant at length to see if were there any emails, were there anything that we could kind of hang our hat on here, but I think it came down to this needs to come back to you, and we tried to get it here as quickly as we could, although there's improvements to be made.
So I hear that because there was staff turnover and not proper documentation, why this happened. And that you are in the process of making sure that this doesn't happen again by correcting those issues?
Staff turnover is difficult to correct.
Right, but
but
turnover shouldn't cause this if there's proper process.
Correct. And we did not have any process, there was no record of an approval of this type of change. So this was the way to get it back to you.
I would just add one more additional thing relative to the department and moving forward. And one of our things that we've been working on very hard over the last several months is using our database and our permitting software to help us coordinate between planning and building, because it is a typical process where planning does come out at the end to do their inspection as well. So we have opportunity to educate people moving forward, and we also have the opportunity to use that system so that we all know and are on the same page to see where the inspections are and where we are in the process and how to communicate that to applicants.
Thank you. I appreciate that. For a lawyer, being as well, I can't say this. Is this, in essence, the city's fault?
No. The fact is that a building permit that's issued in violation of the zoning doesn't make it a valid building permit. The building permits will clearly here, the PDO had very specific requirements. Mm-hmm. The fact that the city issued a building permit in violation of those requirements doesn't make it the city's fault.
Well, and to clarify, it's the building permit showed the same materials. It's when we got into the inspections that apparently there may have been a little bit of disconnect.
And then again, even that more so makes it not the city's fault, because when you submit building plans and we approve those plans, you don't get to change those plans and change the materials. You submit amended plans and then we sign off on them. That's the drill, and that's what should have happened. It didn't. Now, at this point, really the issue before you is really twofold. You could say the staff action here in requiring a sketch plan that's consistent with the PDO is within the staff authority and uphold that action, or the alternative would be to say that the staff plan to require a sketch plan consistent with the PDO is arbitrary, unreasonable, and capricious, and either reject that approach in full or in part. But I would tell you, my recommendation is the PDO, that was when it was allowed for residential, and it's not now, but when it was, the deal was you had to provide superior materials, superior development, and superior product, because you were essentially getting to walk away from all the rules. The exchange was, you provide superior stuff, you don't have rules. Well, if you don't provide the superior stuff, then you shouldn't have had the PDO and you shouldn't get to walk away from the rules. And that essentially, from my view of the code, that's the deal. And if the city's not getting the deal, then the city should enforce its rules.
Thank you. Just one more question. So you heard the discourse on the tile and the differing of opinion. Could you get back to us with, I don't want to say which one's right, because I know there's always disagreements on exactly how something will be, and it sounds like it's a newer process. Can you get back to us with how a process is done, based on what Mark was saying, how long that would actually last, or what, how that would look? I mean, you don't want tiles falling off. That makes the city, it looks bad. But are you talking about 25 years? Are you talking 5 years? Are you talking 30 years? Again, because in any kind of home, you replace the roof, you replace many things, and I don't feel like I have enough information to make a decision on the tile without having more specification on something other than, well, someone thinks it doesn't work and someone does.
I can definitely look into that. I, in preparing for this, did do some research. I think one of the troubles that I found in looking whether or not travertine tile is a durable exterior product is it is a relatively new trend in exterior. So from initial research, I did not find much, but I can double down on those efforts if it calls for it.
I have a question. Could I ask a question? So if the applicant would have come back with, say, a simulated stone porcelain tile product that was of the same scale and color, would that have triggered this public hearing, or would that have been a staff administrative review?
Thank you, Commissioner. There are several, this is an interesting case because you can kind of see the development process from the very beginning to the very end. There's lots of little decisions that get made along the way. The windows, for example, the eave height, I would feel comfortable approving a building permit for those items, knowing that they had a very similar look to what you had seen earlier. The change in material, I think, is something that you probably need. The railings and the change in material for me were items that changed the look of the building enough that they need to come back to you. The building massing, the shape of the building, the setbacks are all the same as what you approved. Really, the building looks very similar to what you approved, but had you, when Mr. Sauger went out to do the inspection, the first thing he pulled out was the site development plan, and wow, there's the Travertine tile has a different look than the stucco, not putting any judgment of quality on either one. There's probably advantages and disadvantages, but that particular change has a distinct look to it that, particularly in plan view, where you've got kind of a masonry element versus, and some cities consider synthetic stucco or stucco to be masonry as well. So with that, there are some judgment calls that need to be made. I would say if they came in with brick and you had seen tile, I would have recommended that come back to you as well. If they came in with a synthetic stone, the other building was approved with synthetic stone. So had this building come in with that, we might have had a long debate about it, but that type of change, some of it needs to come back to you.
Any other questions? I just want to go through the process. A typical project that's not a PDO, just your average everyday building. Inspector comes out, looks and sees, he has no clue as to zoning, or he's looking at the building and the drawings that were presented. Thousands of changes or decisions and changes are made every day on a construction site, as you know. Some of them are, what did that bozo architect show? We can't do this. Others are just, it's not practical, or here's a better way of doing something. It'll look better than the drawings. The reason I say this is if we have a PDO in the future, there needs to be a process where certain things are flagged that are necessary so that the typical building inspector that knows nothing about the zoning, never looked at a PDO or the site development plan, will know that he has to check these things off in addition to the standard everyday building things. So that's just an editorial comment about what we can do in the future to head this off. Hopefully the city can pick up some of these things and save heartache down the road like this. He's not going to pick up everything, and this will happen every once in a while just because things slip through. So, any other questions?
Just a quick one to follow up on that. I think you said there are two duplexes planned, right? The one's built, the one's not built. Did you say the second one was approved with synthetic stone in lieu of the Travertine?
That is correct. It's a very similar structure. The instead of travertine tile, there's a synthetic stone material that's approved on the other one, and that may be so that one was never constructed. My understanding is that lot was sold. That may be coming back to you in the near future about changes, plan changes to that side of the building, or that side of the development as a whole.
Thank you. We move on. Entertain a motion.
I'd like to consider postponing to a date certain to get more information. This is a really unfortunate circumstance. I don't like the idea of postponing, and I know that's a hardship in that sense, but to go to the denial route is a worse hardship. And I would like to get some more information on what we've been learning about using travertine and getting more resolution between these two conversations, and also perhaps even considering what the other house looked at that is no longer going to be done that was approved, because that did go through a public process. That might give us a couple things to compare it to instead of just the stucco, to try to maintain keeping what we thought we were getting. I don't know if others are in agreement with that, but I want to throw that out.
Do you wish to make a motion?
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
I
You
do.
make a
I do wish
motion?
to make a motion.
Then make a motion, please.
I make a motion to postpone to a date certain, which I believe would have to be in January because we're not meeting again in December.
There's some language here.
She
Show me
can
where
use
the
her own
language
language. She just did.
Yeah. I just don't know what the next planning commission meeting would be. Do you guys by any chance have that?
January 14th.
Thank you. So yes, I would like to.
Do we have a second of the motion?
Second.
Have a second. Any discussion?
That is a presidential motion, so you have to vote on that first and resolve it before you do anything else.
I'm sorry, start again.
That is a presidential motion, a motion to postpone. It overrules everything else, so you have to take the motion to postpone, vote on that. If it passes, you've postponed. If not, you can go back to the discussion on the item.
Right. We have to take a vote on this
Yes.
motion. Yes, getting ready to. No discussion. Please vote.
All right, that's 2 for and 5 against, so the motion fails.
Okay, set. Let's go back. Does somebody have a motion?
All right, I move to approve Planning Commission Resolution 38-18, approving the sketch plan for 5556 and 5558 South Sycamore Street with the condition that railings be installed as per the original PDO.
Just railings.
Just railings.
Okay. We have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. Discussion?
Go ahead.
I'm bothered by the stucco. I think the scale of the original material contributes to the character of the building and to the quality of the design of the building. I'm not opposed to the roof changes that have been made. I guess I can go down the columns. I think the columns are they're not necessarily consistent with what's elsewhere in the neighborhood. They tend to be more sort of a singular column from column base to column capital, column top, and they're not necessarily broken up like the way that they're shown here. So I would be in favor of adding to the elements that Mr. Stallman included would be the tile and then also the columns.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, we'll go down the line. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I have a few comments. The PDO is a legal contract, in effect, that pretty clearly states the requirements and refers to the sketch plan, which is a great sketch plan, shows some great details, and it's unfortunate it wasn't adhered to. I, likewise with Dan, have a problem with switching to stucco. I think that's a significant change. The columns also had the travertine tile on it, and so that is in the same category as a significant change. And the third significant change is the railings, in my opinion. I don't have as much of a problem with the modification of the eaves and the corner window. I had the pleasure of owning a house that had a corner window like that. It was beautiful from the inside, great, addition to the interior space, but I agree it's not that noticeable from the outside, and I consider that a minor change. But those first three items, I think, are significant and definitely have a problem with them. The issue of the tile, the travertine tile, travertine's been used for thousands of years in construction. It's not a new material. Maybe for the U.S. residential market it is, but just like a veneered, engineered stone product, same issue. You've got a semi-porous or non-porous stone, whether it's manufactured or natural, adhered to a backing. If it's properly installed, it's going to last a long, long time, very durable and very high quality. If your contractor says he can't do it, maybe it's time to get a new contractor. I'd put that material on my house. I think it would look great, and in my opinion, there's no reason why it shouldn't have been put on this project.
David?
Okay, well, I'll take it in my own order. The eaves, I can certainly understand that those needed to be changed to meet code, to get the correct amount of insulation in the building. The corner windows, I think it's more of a contemporary look to have a corner window with glass that bends around a corner. I have seen that before. I know it's possible, but I like, this almost looks like a prairie style home, and I just don't think that would fit in this area. The railings, I tend to agree. I think the house looks unfinished with no railings there. I don't agree that it's more inviting. I think it's less inviting. Even though by code it's not required. I'm probably going to depart from everyone else on the tile because while I don't like the stucco, I would have preferred something else that was a high quality. There's a lot of stucco buildings or stucco homes in my neighborhood, and they tend to in the time frame that I'm thinking of, at least, the stucco looks just as bad as reportedly the tile would. But the tile itself, I don't have any familiarity with travertine tile, except I'm looking at this picture of an example. And to me, when I first looked at this, I thought it was concrete block. I don't like it. It looks unfinished. I thought it was the back of the place in an alley, and then it just was not finished. So I don't really like the tile either. I wasn't at this meeting when it was approved before. I was initially thinking that, maybe had we been back at that point and this was what was proposed, that, maybe this would have been approved, recommended by staff. I don't know. Just looking at it more and more, I'm kind of pulling away from that, thinking that just looking at these pictures, I'm just not sure that this is worth the other changes the reason for these high quality finishes was that the city was giving up some something in return, and I'm not sure that we got what we paid for, so to speak. The columns were the first thing that jumped out at me that I don't like. I like the column with the two separate 2x4 or 4x4s, I guess. I'm only looking at them on paper, but it looks better than what's here with the stucco and the framing. I just think that looks out of place. So, I'm struggling with this, and not for the same reasons as everyone else, I think. I can certainly understand that if a builder won't warranty a process, that I wouldn't want to do it either. But, and I don't like the look of the tile. I think it looks unfinished. And maybe if I were at this house, it would look better to me, but I just don't know. But, the stucco definitely is not a high-quality material in my mind. I don't live in a fancy neighborhood, and there's plenty of places that have stucco in my neighborhood. So, I don't know. I guess I'm undecided at this point.
Okay. Greg?
Yeah, I think the question we're considering here is, do the proposed changes meet the intent of the PDO? And the way I look at it is, one is, are the changes going to have a significant effect on sort of the scale, the visual integrity of the building, and the trade-off of, the reduced setback, or whether it has a insignificant or minor impact. So, just going down the list of the 5 requested changes, the Eaves, I think, is almost unnoticeable and certainly warranted from the discussions. The wrapped windows I could live without as well. I think that a good argument's been made that the sketch plan actually has a better look to it, or more consistent at least with the rest of the building and the neighborhood context. The column caps, I kind of like the detail. I know it's not consistent with the rest of the buildings, but I would defer to my architect friends. I'm not an architect. I like the sort of whimsy of it, but could live without it. But I think the permanence of the tile, whether it be travertine or something similar to it, I think is a deal breaker for me. The railing, I think, as well. I agree with my colleagues that it does create a sort of an enclosure, a porch, if you will, more than what's there now. So I can support a sketch plan that would change this with the 2 exceptions of the tile and the railing.
Robin?
I agree with that.
Sure.
I agree with everything that's been said overall. I do have a concern that if we approve this as is, that we're setting a precedent that others could just come back and you could change the materials and willy-nilly and then come back and try to get approval. So that concerns me. Overall, I think the building is attractive, and with the exception, though, that the stucco is a more inferior product, as we believe. And anyway, I agree with all the comments that were already stated.
Bruce?
I think the reason for the original motion is that there was an expressed logic to backing away from the tile, whether it ultimately is Mark suggested, is ultimately true in terms of what was being proposed, is above my pay grade. But the other thing that's involved here is that to the applicant's credit, there was conversation with the building department, and there was acquiescence by the building department that what was being proposed worked. So, I mean, pretty clearly, this does not align or reconcile with the PDO. But at the same point in time, it's incumbent upon us as a city to basically make sure that what's in the PDO is communicated and is the standard to which is measured. As has been expressed, I think the eaves, the corner window, and the column tops are relatively small potatoes in the grand scheme of things. The motion has the installation of the railings, and so now we're down to the tile. And as I indicated, I think, I don't have any idea whether if he'd been proposed to begin with, stucco would have passed muster in the grand scheme of things. But given how the practical application of the project went forward with the parties involved, it doesn't strike me as being a massive degradation in the quality of the project. So I'm willing to give a little bit on that one with the caveat that we do need to collectively figure out how to make sure that point forward, if we're setting conditions on things, that they're, you know, they go top to bottom in terms of down to the inspector level. And I understand the turnover issues, but as was indicated, process-wise, the process should be relatively fail-safe beyond, you know, who's looking at it at any given point in time. Thanks.
Okay. I cannot vote for the motion because it leaves off the tile. Somebody down on this end mentioned there are quite a few products that are very thin material, like synthetic stone, real stone, brick, very, very thin brick, not their standard width brick, that are installed in this fashion, very thin, installed over the same substrate as they have on this building. For instance, there's the big block on the south side of Main Street towards the east end. That's done with brick that's about this thick. We call it, what do you call it? What's that?
Thin brick? Or
very, very thin, yeah.
Thin brick, yeah.
Thin brick. What do they call it? Peel and stick.
Lick and stick.
Lick and split. Lick and
stick.
Stick. Thank you. Say that 5 times straight. And that is held up. It's a very thin material, same substrate. So to me, we, the City of Littleton and the Planning Commission, we entered into a pact when we approved this PDO. We made a major concession in going from reducing the front setback from 18 feet to 9 feet. That allowed this applicant to do a much nicer building. In exchange, we demanded high-quality design, high-quality materials. I'm in agreement that the building is pretty decent design. The quality of the materials, I'm sorry, does not meet the stated objective here. So we did our duty. The applicant did not do their duty in installing what they promised to do. So I will be voting against the. No, we'll stick with the main motion and see how it goes. Okay. Oh, I can do amendment. I'll make amendment that we include the installation of the travertine tile in the building.
Second it. Well, Robin beat me to it.
Robin has a second. So we will, any discussion on the amendment? We'll vote on the amendment first. Seeing none, cast your vote for the amendment.
All right, the amendment to add the condition of the travertine tile is unanimous.
Interesting. Okay, back to the main motion with the amendment approved. Any discussion?
I would just like to add that in relation to the process of communicating the requirements of a PDO, there may be a fairly simple change that the city can do. I've done my own designs, submitted plans to the building department in Littleton, and as an owner builder, completed and constructed the projects. And when you do that, you get a checklist, permit checklist. So on that permit checklist that has, electrical, mechanical, all the different applicable, things that are going to be constructed for the permit, just add another box. Is this a PDO? I don't know. It's residential is no longer in PDO, but maybe in the commercial realm, it'll still be applicable. And if it is, then says requires, planning commission approval for changes to sketch plans.
No, we are done. There's been suggestions on the city improving the process, which I agree with. But the bottom line is it's up to the applicant to abide by the approvals. Building is such a complicated process that there are always things that will fall through the cracks. But yes, the city can do a better job, and I'm sure it will. But again, the applicant needs to, any applicant of any type of project like this needs to abide by the agreement.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that, and I have totally abided by every single requirement when I've done my own plans and permits, and didn't always want to, but I did, and that's the process.
Any other comments? Seeing none, time to vote.
All right, the vote on the amended main motion passes with 1 against.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a 10-minute recess and get into our study session. Number 18-435, an update to the recreation definition and shooting ranges in the zoning code. Go.
Yes, we'll do a brief presentation this evening. It's regarding some proposed code changes that we will be bringing forward at a future meeting, and we wanted to go over the proposed changes with you this evening. We, staff, have determined and realized that in our zoning code right now, we have not as much definition around the term recreational use as would be helpful in this day and age. So that's really the main thrust for this presentation this evening. And it came to light relative to an indoor shooting range that staff received a proposal on, and it was found to have met the zoning for that area of the city. So as a result, it's made us look at what changes we want to bring to our zoning code relative to recreation and specifically indoor and shooting ranges. So quickly, currently recreation and shooting ranges are a principal permitted use in B2 and B3. They're also oftentimes an allowed use in the PD districts that allow recreational uses. And also the other wonky thing, if that's a word, in our zoning code is that our PDs do allow a mix of commercial, industrial, and residential uses, and sometimes that can create conflicts because that pretty much is anything goes within PDs. So that's just some background. So in looking at ways to update our code, you have in your packet some proposed changes, specifically around creating new and updating definitions around recreational uses, and including the definition of gun ranges as a use. And then the second piece to this is to a proposal to make gun ranges a conditional use in those districts where they may be located. And applying this in PDs. A conditional use, as you know, comes before the Planning Commission, and it's based on whether or not the use in that particular location meets is a good fit for that neighborhood. So that's the general gist of the proposal, like I said, that was attached in your packet. And so that's really the gist of what we have in front of you this evening. There's some other minor changes, but that's the main piece. So we are recommending that we add definitions zoning code for gun ranges and other recreational uses, and to make sure that gun ranges in the future would be considered a conditional use and require a conditional use permit. And as you know, Planning Commission is the final decision-making body over conditional uses.
And Mr. Chair, a good example of how the current code creates a problem. There is a well-known plan development called South Park. And in their allowed list of uses, it says recreational uses is permitted in the Littleton City Code. Well, a good example is the only specified indoor recreational use right now is bowling alleys and game arcades. Everything else falls under indoor recreational use is not specified, which includes indoor shooting ranges, It also would include, for example, possibly indoor sex clubs. I don't think that was ever the intent, but that's the way this code right now works. And that's why it's important. The folks who did the crayon assessment of our zoning code a few years ago, one of the areas that they did get to and recommend was the city needed to make sure that everything in the chart we define, and everything that we define we have in the chart. This is exactly taking that advice to heart. And we want to come back to you, go through the specifics, and ask the commission to recommend a text amendment to the city council on this topic. And this is consistent, what you see in this packet. We looked at a number of cities, Lakewood, Greenlee. This is very consistent with what you'd find elsewhere in the state. What isn't consistent with what you'd find elsewhere in the state is what we currently have.
So with that, do you have any comments or questions? Happy to hear them.
Well, this change won't affect the current South Park application, correct?
It will not. The one thing we would propose to do in this change, right now it's kind of an odd thing. Our code does not address what happens if you are a principal permitted use and the city changes the rules to make you a conditional use. And we would propose to include some language to address that. Because if you're a principal permitted use, yes, your use is vested, your use may be vested, but that doesn't mean that you get an exemption from any changes into the land use standards. And the goal here is to make sure that if you cease operating as a principal permitted use, you're now going to become subject to the land use standards for a conditional use.
And or if there was any expansion in the future, it would have to come into compliance with whatever that zoning code required at that time.
That's really interesting about the conditional use coming into force with an existing use. A couple of questions just on the shooting ranges themselves. You list some conditions, operating hours, et cetera. There's nothing to do with noise. Is that just covered by the noise code, or it's been left off here by on purpose, or does it need to be included? I would think noise would be one of the major items of contention.
The reason that it wasn't listed is that we already have, it is covered by the Littleton Noise Code, and secondly, we expect that is going to be something that we're going to need to address. And the third side of this would be is that the design for these, basically in the building code, they are required to have noise mitigation as well. So we didn't feel that we needed to address that right here, but we will be addressing noise and coming back to you with recommendations on addressing noise, because the city's noise code is another area that needs a lot of addressing.
Another point is mentioned you're only allowed to use the caliber weapon or what have you as approved. I could see, they can switch it and somebody brings starts a bazooka range, much more noise,
yes.
much more danger. So when you're applying for a permit, you have to specify, what type of weapon you're shooting?
We would want you to do that, particularly for an indoor range, because an indoor range, you may not be able to use certain large caliber weapons, depending on how it's designed. Now, many of the more modern designs today, yes, you could use everything from things like a revolver 9mm, 40 caliber, 45, and you can use both rifles and semi-automatics, such as a AR-15. And many of the indoor ranges today, you could use an AR-15 because they're designed to have sufficient both noise and protective mitigation to allow for that.
I'd also add, depending on what you're wanting to allow within your range also then determines what the building code requirements are. So based on whatever caliber you're selecting, that is the building code standard that you have to build the range to.
The only other item that I was looking at, all this blue stuff, this is new stuff, is quite a few times it talks about, I'll read one, Planning Commission, Board of County Commissioners.
We caught that.
There's a couple of items and it says county.
It is the Planning Commission and the City Council, not the Board of County Commissioners. But we actually looked at a couple of counties that also had this. And so we obviously in the draft going to count, when it comes to you, the Board of County Commissioners will be gone.
Okay, so yeah, you'll update that, correct that. It happens 2 or 3 times at least. Okay.
There's different codes that we pulled
I
from.
understand. This is just a rough draft, let's say.
So your table, definition table, it's 1100 recreation, 216. So the new rows that are all highlighted, those are new rows for that table?
Yes, because we only had about 5 items in the recreation. So now you're seeing that we have added a whole series of different items under recreation and
Indoor recreation specifically.
Just in general, because we wanted to make sure we covered, we have the table match closer to the definitions. And right now it doesn't.
So in the one like 11.12 says movie theaters, and you've got that crossed out, and it just says public athletic health club, gymnasium, pool. So that was there. You just changed movie theaters to another.
Yes.
Go down to 11.14. It was also in that.
Yes, we tried to hook things together that were very similar. We had movie theaters separate from performance theaters. So a theater that did like the Littleton Town Hall Arts Center was treated as a different type of use than a movie theater. And what we wanted to do was to try to group uses more closely together. We had certain things like libraries and museums, but we didn't have them grouped really with art galleries and art studios. But many times a museum will have art, and so we really tried to group things together in a more organized fashion.
Okay, yeah, I see that. Now, how do you decide whether you're going to add a new, like, permitted that I see in that row that I mentioned, 11.12? You got permits, but then they're added to industrial.
Yes.
So is that following other cities' codes or?
Yeah. What we tried to do is when we began to separate the uses and redo the chart, we tried to stay with as close the use determinations as existed in the existing code. But because this was in essence adding, and we wanted to show it. One of the things that happens in Littleton has been in the past. We had a number of things that we allowed in the business zones, but we didn't allow in the industrial zones. And it's fairly common nowadays in some of the industrial zones to have things like health codes because of some of the parking issues and other things. And so we just wanted to recognize, we wanted to show that A, we were recommending that, but B, that's the reason for it.
You consult with the Clarions?
We looked at the Clarion, yes we did, as well as a number of other codes because in fact the definitions is one of the big things Clarion said this city needed to do, which you also see in the short-term rental ordinance. We added a number of definitions and that was really taking the Clarion assessment to her that we needed to do that, and as we come back with other codes, you're going to continue to see that because that makes sense. Your chart and your definitions should match.
So these are things that other cities have done and accomplished, and we're kind of catching up with.
Yes, we are. That's a very good description.
I was going to, a couple of quick questions. On page number 9 of the attachment here, number 8 says no retail sales of firearms or their repairs permitted as an accessory use to an outside shooting range. So ostensibly, they would be permitted as accessory uses to an indoor shooting range?
Mr. Tillman, yes. If you look at the indoor and outdoor ranges, most of the good example, I happened to be in Phoenix seeing my kids over the weekend, and there was an indoor range right down the street, Shooter's World. It's a very common thing for those indoor ranges to sell firearms. Yeah. The outdoor ranges generally don't because they can't have any way to secure them. They can't really, most of the outdoor ranges don't have a retail facility, and frankly, the outdoor ranges become a little indoor. The retail is very easy to keep separate and to keep under control. The outdoor ranges, if we were to have one, and I would tell you it's highly unlikely based on these standards that Littleton would ever have one. The concern is right now it's an undesignated use, and we want it as a designated use so we have standards to require you to meet to. But realistically, it doesn't, they operate differently than an indoor range, which is why.
Well, the range at Cherry Creek, that's used to not be inside, but now is inside Cherry Creek. Yeah. That's an outdoor range, but they have a building where they have firearms, and yeah. I don't know if they specifically sell them, but they rent them. And they rent other ancillary items, you know, for shooting. And so they sell, I don't know if they sell firearms, but they sell other stuff.
I mean, I guess, yeah, that's maybe kind of where I was going too, was, you know, I'm fine with what you just described, but if you want to call it out that indoor ranges can do such and such, outdoor ranges can't do such and such, you know, unless they have some sort of facility.
In a building or a facility.
Yeah,
maybe this would clarify.
We can clarify that, yes.
Okay. The other one I was going to ask about, sort of in the same vein, is storage of firearms. So if you have, I don't know how this overtly works, but if somebody wanted to store their firearms at a range so they could just go there and shoot and put the gun back in a locker or something, I don't know if that happens, or people just bring these things back and forth from their houses.
That's every range I've been at, and I shot a number of people bring the firearms to and from their homes. I would have serious concerns from a safety and security standpoint about allowing the storage of weapons at ranges.
Do you want to then basically call it out and basically say you're not permitted to store?
We could. I think the fact that we don't have any authorization for that would indicate, because it's a conditional use, you are going to have to meet the requirements. We can call it out and simply say, we'll just do that. We'll call it out.
Okay. What's the problem of me as an individual storing my AK-47 at the facility?
And the problem is that if it's just a locker, it now increases exponentially the risk of that facility being a target for a robbery or burglary. If you were to look at other places with a safe storage, you would have like gun safes, you would have a security room or whatever. The concern I would certainly have from a prosecutor's standpoint would be somebody would just put up a series of cupboards or lockers and put locks on them and say, pay your $2 and you can store, and like those are not secure.
Like at the gym?
Yes, like at the gym.
Put your gym bag in there or your firearm.
Yeah.
Well, don't prohibit it. Just make it clear that storage of personal firearms has to be kept in, behind 6 inches of steel or whatever. Make it.
Yes, I mean the concern that we would have is that I have not seen a shooting range that was designed to have permanent weapon storage, and that is just a concern from a law enforcement standpoint. We're increasing the risk of this thing now becoming, actually, right now they are really not a target, so to speak, for criminal activity. Adding the storage of weapons changes that whole dynamic.
It's interesting though, because maybe you don't know the answer to this question, but like the Centennial Gun Club over in Centennial, I guess, off of Arapahoe Road, it's a pretty large indoor facility, and to my knowledge, they don't have any storage for people's weapons, but they have they have a large supply of weapons that haven't been sold. But I don't think that they store those in, anywhere except under glass, just like Dick's Sporting Goods or Walmart or.
Well, is that the case? Like, I noticed that the indoor shooting range, it says that storage of firearms shall be in a vault. So that indicates a very secure storage for your indoor ranges. But I noticed on the staff communication, it says staff recommends a separate code and administrative process that will require police department to review all applications for retail gun stores and firing ranges. Do our retail stores, don't they have to store all their firearms in a vault?
No. Retail stores in this state, now there are other states like California, which many cities have rules for retail gun stores. There's no city in Colorado that has rules for retail gun stores. So the only requirements are they have to have what we call a federal firearms license issued by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which is a division of the Department of Treasury. And that license, we as an agency, local law enforcement agency, are notified, but they notify based upon post office address. So you could be in Englewood and have a Littleton address, we would be notified of it, but Englewood would not be. Conversely, you could have an Englewood address and be in the city limits of Littleton, and Englewood would be notified, but we would not be. So we don't even have an accurate number of exactly how many federal firearms licensees we have in the city. We have a pretty good guess, but not 100% accurate. So those entities don't have to comply with any storage requirements.
So
we'll make recommendations.
That seems crazy because, you have a smash and grab at a liquor store, they get away with a couple of, handles or whatever. But, there's been some smash and grabs at gun retail stores, and a large amount of weapons have, gone out into the void. So is there any way the city can address that within our city limits?
I would tell you that is a discussion that we have presented to the city council, and we've said to the council that if you want to look at that, our recommendation is we ought to look at the land use first, because this is a critical piece. We've been filling this gap. If you want to look at that gap, we as staff can certainly do that. Now, I would tell you that will be a much more divisive community discussion, because you're going to have two different sides showing up and participating rather actively in that discussion. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Right. It just means it's going to be a much more divisive discussion.
So this is the first piece we wanted to take on.
So this would be the first piece.
They do this piece first, because this really does help clean up the land use side of it and how that future gun ranges would be approved through. So that was our first task.
So for land use, then you just have to go to the code. What are those? Those are retail, so they're business.
That would be part of the city code.
City code.
Not come to the commission. We would more likely look at that as a regulatory code where there would be criminal penalties imposed, but it would not be treated as a land use code.
More like an operational component.
Yeah, because even if you put in vaults, it's like not 100% secure. Ski Patrol, we play with things like C4 and AMFO, and we are required by federal law to put them in huge bunkers, and they've been broken into before.
Oh yes.
And we've lost
some ordinance, which is serious, and it's an FBI investigation. So it's so important to have things securely stored. It's a community safety issue.
That will be certainly, that could well be installment number 2. But this is something that we feel well within the staff ability to both implement, to develop, bring to you, implement, and we feel very, very strongly we need to have this piece in place because we don't have the land use tools to handle this in an appropriate way.
Can I ask you a question about the table? 11.10 is indoor recreation. Is that a subheader? Because there's no,
Yes, yes.
so there's no uses.
There's no uses.
No, it's the category, we're outlining the category.
Okay, so then 11.30 is outdoor recreation, but there are uses.
Right, so I just was making a couple notes. Yes, we need to make sure we're categorizing these in the right way based on how we use that numbering system.
And then the only other thing that is, you were mentioning in your vernacular, you were mentioning the sex clubs. 11.22 indoor recreation not included. It's conditional use in B 1 to 3, but then in I 1 and 2, they're then allowed in that. And I'm more thinking of uses that we don't even know about yet that could crop up years down the road.
No, and we will certainly correct the headers. The idea was, and a good example is like adult. Right now in the code, we specify adult cabarets, adult movie theaters, but we don't specify other types of adult uses. And one of the big ones has become adult saunas and adult clubs. And we wanted to specify those. And now we've carried over the same regulatory structure, which is that they are primarily conditional uses in the business zones, and they are only as a principal use in the industrial zones. And so we've carried that over without making any significant changes there. But we wanted to make, and they are still subject. One of the other things that's hard in this code is, that's an example for use that's subject to a whole series of locational restrictions, but they're not in the zoning code. They're in the business code. So you as a commission, if you saw an application, you would not realize that they're subject to a whole series of locational restrictions from other types of protected uses. But because none of that's in the zoning code. That's the type of thing where we will get that into the zoning code. That's all land use, and it should all be in one place. And we are going to get things like that eventually into one place, because it doesn't make sense to have locational restrictions on a land use item in the business code.
Just one minor comment on page 1. It looks like the definition's towards the bottom. Looks like we have recreation facility private, and then the next one is shooting range, and it talks about a shooting range being public. I know there are some private shooting ranges, so should shooting range be a building open to the general public and or a private membership?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, good point.
I had a question on, it's also on page 1, where in indoor recreation includes libraries and museums, and then we separate out library and museum, and I was curious about that.
It's in 2 places is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, so on page 1, under indoor recreation, third subject down, it includes libraries and museums, and then there's a separate library and museum just right underneath it.
Right. Yeah, we'll look at that because I agree. I just flipped over because I want to make sure on the land use chart, right? We'll just look through those because we'll try to clean that up.
Indoor recreation, the general category would include libraries and museums, but on the land use chart, you're going to see that as a subcategory. The general category will be indoor recreation, but then libraries, museums will be a subcategory.
We have the same with amusement arcade. That's the same thing, right?
Thanks. And also curious, outdoor recreation, it says characterized by moderate impacts. Is that going to be pretty subjective to decide what moderate means?
You're talking about
Yeah.
fields, soccer fields.
Good point. We can look at that.
You can look at that. One of the reasons that that's used is that some people have tried to argue, for example, that a sports stadium is outdoor recreation. Well, a sports stadium doesn't have moderate impacts on traffic. And so we would certainly, if somebody decided to build a new Bronco Stadium in Littleton, as much as we might all like it, our position is going to be, it is definitely not outdoor recreation.
Then on page 5, under E, number 3, it talks about displays of fireworks. And there's just some confusing language in there. Displays of fireworks shall be permitted between the hours of only in the time set forth. It just seemed a little...
Yes, we'll work on that language. The idea there is that generally fire departments will issue a permit for the display of fireworks, and you're only permitted to do it during the times in the fire department permit. And we'll change that language so it's not so disjointed.
It seems to be in need of a lot of editing and cross-checking.
Yeah, we will do some of that, yes.
There was just a couple of similar things on page 16 where...
What page, I'm sorry?
16, last page.
Okay.
And it's, that first paragraph, it talks about remove increase instead of remove and cease, just another typo.
Yeah.
And in E, halfway down, it talks about permit to tail to timely remove and cease, and I didn't know what that meant. Permit to tail to timely remove and cease.
Oh, that should be permit to fail to timely remove.
Okay, all right.
This draft, because this came to you for the study session, there's been a bit of editing done, I can tell you, on the draft after it came to you. The agenda process kind of got you an earlier draft, and so, but we'll take all of these and confirm that everyone has been done.
It's the same draft that comes us up. And it probably would be easier to have the comments on the same draft, right? So that everyone's looking at the same document, just makes it cleaner.
Any other questions?
Along the lines of what Dan was saying about the public versus private, on page 2 and 11.12, public athletic and health clubs. You could probably remove the public there because a lot of them are private, and that would cover all of them.
So you're saying, yeah.
And more, I think what we need to really do there is we need to kind of define what public means there, because even a private entity is technically viewed as open to the public because it is, but they're operated privately. So what we want to do is we need to kind of define this whole term public, because it isn't what we think of, which is something that the city operates.
Is that going to be a half a page definition? I hope not.
I certainly hope not. But we can define that.
I just had one other observation. You might have already picked it up under, on the first page, under the definition of recreation. That recreation in quotes means the refreshment, but to be consistent with the other definitions, you
Don't
wouldn't
need the
include
piece.
that.
Yeah.
And also, I tend to agree through forms of play, amusement, or relaxation. I think that's a pretty good definition. I tend to use, being in parks, I tend to use leisure, place of relaxation is a more broad and encompassing
Anyone else? Getting dangerously close to taking a vote on extending till past 10.
I mean, you hope for that, keep it
We're good. Any other questions? Well, if you want to pretend to be Robin, please ferret out any of the other little technical errors, discrepancies, definitions, and shoot them to you guys. Oh, there's a pun there. Okay.
And you will, this will be back in front of you formally at your next meeting in
I just wanted
January.
to ask one question,
Yeah.
Steve especially. Been hearing a lot of stories about the advent of legalized gambling on sports.
Yeah.
And thinking of the definition of recreation, is there something that we should be looking forward to that would discourage or encourage, or that completely outside?
Well, I think that will be something that should the state decide to do that, we're definitely going to have to give some thought to addressing that in the zoning code. A couple of states, New Jersey being the most recent one, has, in fact, there's a U.S. Supreme Court case where New Jersey sued the federal government saying we have the right to legalize it, and did so. Right now in Colorado, only in a couple of designated areas and in some Indian nations is gambling legal, but that will certainly be something for us to watch. It's on it's just like marijuana dispensaries are on a list of things to watch, because in some states there's now been a push to even try to preempt local control in that area. So we watch those things very closely.
Keep in mind our use code was developed in late 70s and ratified in 82, and a lot of uses weren't even invented back then.
That is true.
A lot of catching up to do.
And that's why you see in a number of these zoning codes all these definitions. I've been asked by council members, so many definitions, and it's like, yes, there are.
I just went to one of these escape room things. Would that be considered indoor recreation? Probably, right?
Indoor amusement.
Escape room?
Amusement, I'm sorry, yeah.
Like it's a game.
Great. Well,
Thank you
thanks,
all.
you guys. We will take all those comments and do our own proofreading before we bring the formal one back to you as well. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. By the way, Merry Christmas. It's been great working with you guys. This has been a great group. You're all well prepared all the time and engaged and asking good questions. And we don't all agree on everything. That's the fun part of it. But it's been a really good year. Really enjoyed working with all of you. Have a great holiday. We'll see you early January. And thank you also, staff.
Yes, thanks.
Good job this year.
Likewise. Yes.
Where's your pepper?
Leadership too, Mark.
Yeah.
Thanks for your leadership.
Yeah.
That's been great.